Hello, hello. Welcome to AMAZE Live. I'm so delighted to be back. It's been a little while. I'm Christine Koh, and I work with the AMAZE team, and I'm so psyched to have the awesome Lucinda Holt here today. Hi.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think it's so important. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we are actually going to be chatting more parent to parent today, but I would love for you, just as we're, kind of getting sorted here, to just give a little background about the work that you do with AMAZE.
Sure. So I work with AMAZE, basically working on the content side. So that what that means is there's a lot that's written for educators, for parents about having conversations with your child about sexuality and about their changing bodies. So I really work with our team of experts to make sure that written content that you see is, accurate and really useful for parents and educators who are looking for resources in their work with young people.
I'm into that, as you know. And, the inspiration for this broadcast actually was something, well, I guess it goes a few clicks back, but, in the Amazed Parents community, a lot of people want to know how to obviously communicate better with kids. Like, it's it's so funny to me, like puberty and changing bodies and all this stuff is stuff we've all dealt with forever, but it continues to be awkward across the generations.
Yeah.
And so I remember you and I had been talking about how people had really responded to this article about like how can we give kids the skills they need to like figure out how to communicate. So you put together some great tips, and I would just love if you could share kind of if you don't mind, when you were thinking about the inspiration for how to put these together, how that came about.
Sure. So as we were thinking about, what do people need to know about supporting their kids and being really great communicators? And the first thing that occurred to me was it's hard. It's hard for adults. We assume that, okay, I just need to teach my kid this, but we aren't always doing a great job at it either. So I was thinking to myself, so what is it I do with my daughter? I have a 13-year-old. What is it I do with her to ensure that she's not being a complete jerk with other people? And when I mean that lovingly.
Yes.
I mean that lovingly. And the reason I say that is because we're all human beings, right? And we have capacity for great love and to be wonderful. We can also be really obnoxious with one another. So when I see my kid behaving in a way that's not great with other people, what do I do about that? When I find myself having a challenge around communication with my kid, how do I let them know, like, oh, I didn't do that so well? How do I communicate with my kid in such a way that she feels like, oh, my mom's modeling something that makes sense to me, that okay, that's how you do it. And I'm not always doing a great job of that, but having all of these thoughts about this, I said to myself, okay, so I had some thoughts and had a conversation with Dan Rice, which some of you may know. He is also an advisor to AMAZE, and he is an amazing educator and works with educators to make sure they're like prepared to create a great environment in the classroom to teach sex ed. So we had a conversation about these tips. I said, this is what I'm thinking. And he said, well, you know what? These all relate to social emotional learning. So there's a whole field dedicated to thinking through how people can communicate, be empathetic with one another. So I was like, okay, I think this is a great basis for these tips. And that's kind of where we started. And that's how they were initially developed. And we came up with 4. We really wanted to keep it concise, like 4 important things for parents to know when they're like saying, okay, how can I support my kid in being a great communicator? Because that's going to be important for them in any relationship they have, whether it's romantic or not.
Yes.
This is so important.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love that I feel like so much, I'm a content creator too. And so you think about your own experience, how that can be relatable to parents. But then I just love that it was like legit in the literature backed up by the educators.
Yes.
I think that's so great. So
yes.
I actually wanted to, we shared a great infographic talking about these tips, but of course, reading and then listening and hearing it brought to life is always a little different. So I just wanted to kind of go through those for people so they could understand them a little bit better. And you mentioned just a few minutes ago the importance of modeling great communication. That is your first tip. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit about that. Perhaps, I think everybody knows about, okay, it's good to model good behavior. But the thing that I love about your tip is where you say, let your kids see you respectfully disagree with somebody else. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So communication is easy when we're all getting along really well and we love each other and we're saying nice things to each other. That's the easy part. The tough part is when we don't agree with one another, when we have a difference of opinion, when things are really tough. How do you communicate then? So if you're modeling for your kid great communication, that means when things get really tough, you're still able to communicate clearly and yet respectfully to another person. And when your kid sees you doing that, they go, oh, okay, so that's how it's done. It's not easy, but this is it can be done. It's good for people to see that even though it's challenging, we can do it, right? We can be respectful of one another. We can express how we feel and still listen to another person, even if we don't necessarily agree with one another.
Yeah, I have so you have a 13-year-old, I have a 14-year-old, and she has many gifts, but one of her challenges in life is she tends to kind of hold stuff in. So I think one of the things that we've been working with her on is like, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to get mad. Like you can still love people after, even if you're mad about something, that doesn't make all the other love go away. So I think in particular, because this era of parenting is so like, okay, let's make everything okay all the time. I think it's maybe even more crucial. Would you agree to like really help kids through this hard stuff?
Yeah. I think it's especially important now, and especially when we see adults not agreeing and then behaving badly. I think it's great then for young people to see, okay, people can disagree and they can have a conversation about it, because I think that makes all the difference, because your child's going to run into people that they don't agree with, that maybe they argue with, but then how do I have a conversation with this person that's still respectful? How do we do that? And if they see the adults around them doing that, that says more than you saying, well, you should communicate. What makes the biggest difference is them seeing that, oh, my mom, my dad, my caregiver is walking the talk. I've seen them do this, so this is how it's done.
That's great. That's great. And I just wanted to mention, for people who are coming on the broadcast now or coming to it later, feel free to drop comments or questions for Lucinda. We always kind of check back later because a lot of people come to these lives later. So just drop your questions and we'll get them answered. So the second point that you made is to keep the lines of communication open with your kids, which is a great tip. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about that, but also to address something I hear from a lot of parents, which is, what do you do about reticent kids? The kids who like kind of keep it all, do you have any pro tips there? And I apologize, there's a huge trash truck rumbling by, so sorry about that, real life. Anyway.
No worries. So what I found is, and I know many of you may have heard this before, but setting aside time when everyone kind of has to talk. And what I mean by setting aside time is dinner should be a time when there are no devices. You know what I mean? Where people have to sit there and be face to face and talk. And yes, there may be times when your child's like, I don't really have a whole lot to say right now. And that's okay. But I think we have to create this space. What I mean by creating the space is creating a time when there aren't other distractions. And it's easy to be very distracted in our world. We've all got our phones and our iPad and our this and our that. But if there can be moments when everyone's together and no one's on a device, and I know some people do weekends where the whole family disconnects, or maybe on a Sunday, everyone disconnects, or dinner time is like a tech-free space where everyone sits there and we just have to be together. And while initially your child may not be the most talkative at those moments, if there is the time and they know, oh, this is that time when we're just going to be together, there's an opportunity then for you to ask them questions, for them to feel like, oh, this is a time when I can talk to them about that thing I wanted to ask about, or something that I've had a question about.
I think that's great, a great idea, and speaks to how important, even for older kids, that routine and kind of knowing that that's coming and that's a safe time. And I wanted to share, kind of related to that, a tip that I got from an educator friend of mine that I think I heard it when my 14-year-old was in kindergarten, and we have been doing it ever since. But she suggested, play the game of, you can call it whatever you want, but she called it high low. So around dinner time, we all say, okay, what was a high from today and what was a low? And it's occurring to me, it's great just because it kind of like gets people going, but also it occurs to me that it's really important to give voice to the negative kind of crappy stuff that happens. So it's funny that we've been doing that for like 9 years, and it's just part of what we do. And I think it always happens at dinner. So I think, yeah, it's really important.
And the other thing I've noticed is that having not reacting when they share things that you might want to have a really strong reaction to, like being really calm in the moment, because the moment we go to judge, to react, they really kind of shut down. So if we can give them this space to say whatever it is they have to say, and it doesn't mean that we can't communicate how we're feeling, but the moment we have that big reaction or move to fix something or judge something really quickly, they tend to kind of shut down. So I think it's one of my biggest challenges, I think, as a parent has been just to let my kid sometimes be when she has something to say or there's something she wants to share, just let it sit for a second, just let them be. And they feel like, oh, okay, so I can come to you with other things, and just say what I have to say.
That's awesome. That's like a total pro tip, is like sometimes you just have to stop talking. Like, okay, so the third tip that you shared was help your child identify, act on, and appropriately communicate their feelings. Talk more about that, because that can feel kind of a little big, I think, for people. So
yeah, that is a big one. And I think adults struggle with this too. In the moment you're having an emotional reaction, you're not even clear how you're feeling. Are you angry? Are you hurt? What are you feeling? But having a child stop and say, well, I'm feeling this way, like name the emotion. And then why are you feeling that way? And then figuring out, so then what's the appropriate action now? Given that this is how you're feeling, right? This is why you're feeling that way. How do we need to act? What do we need to do in this moment? And that's, yes, you're right. That's like a huge thing to do. But if you take the time to work with the kid around that in the moment, and it seems initially, I feel like it seems like a lot of work, it helps them start to figure out, oh, okay, so sometimes I have an emotional reaction, and this may be what that reaction is about. And then here's what I need to do about it. And when they don't know, letting them know, you know what, you can always come to me. Like if you're having a moment, or another adult that you trust who supports you, you can always go to them and say, here's what I'm feeling, and I'm not sure what to do about it, yeah, but that, you're right, that is a big kind of thing to take on, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I also wanted to recommend, and I think I might have talked to Nora Galperin on our team about this too, but I'm a big fan of role play, actually.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little hokey, but it totally works, because I think that, when you get to be an adult, you sort of kind of assume your kids will like figure some of this stuff out by osmosis. But even this past summer, my 14-year-old had to like go on a babysitting interview, and this is different than sex ed, but I think it's related in the role play, where I said, well, like, what are you going to do if she tries to counter your rate? Like, why don't we pretend we're doing it, just so you can kind of get, and it was like at first very uncomfortable for her, but then when she started talking, I think it did help to take a few practice swings at it before the real thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent, especially if something's happened and they're kind of, stewing over it and aren't sure what to do. You can always totally role model with them. It's not hokey at all. It actually works, because it gives them an opportunity to practice that. Yeah.
So the last point that I wanted to hit on that you shared was to help your kids understand what impact their actions have on other people. So yeah, it's another big one. And I think it's one that can be hard if there's been like a negative situation. So can you talk through this a little bit about both the high and the low about this point?
Yeah. So this is a tough one. And again, adults, I think, struggle with this as well. Being able to say, oh, okay, so you just took that from this, I'm thinking of smaller kids. I remember my child being small. Well, here's a great example. She was a hugger when she was little. There are people who don't want to be hugged, but she wanted to hug people. So I feel like we spent a lot of time, or I'd see her going over to some kid and just, grabbing them. And I'd have to come over and I go, "Oh, did you ask if they want to be hugged?" And, she's looking at me like, "Doesn't everyone want to be hugged?"
Oh.
Who wants to be, you know what I mean? So we just have to stop and take a moment and say, well, it's okay to hug people, but we want to make sure they want to be hugged. And so it took probably years for her to start to register that, oh, I need to check in with people first. So it did take a lot of talking about it for her to say, okay, let me stop before I hug this person and check in with them. And I even said to her, you can always use your words. You don't have to hug someone. If you just want to say hello to them, you can go over and say hello. So she learned to just go over and say hi to people, right? Instead of just hugging them immediately.
Mhm.
And that's something you kind of build on as they get older, noticing how they're engaging with a person, or maybe they're using language with friends that you think, oh, is that person okay with that? And then you can even ask them, oh, earlier I heard you say to your friend XYZ, or are they okay with that? And they may not have even thought about it. And then maybe they go in and check with that person and have a conversation. So
Mhm.
it's kind of an ongoing process.
Well, it is, and it makes me think of two things. One is that I feel like it's the great thing about these touch points with your kids is it's sort of a continual exercise in mindfulness, right? Because you have to yes, you're tuned into your feeling of I love hugging, more hugging, but you also need to tune into other people and develop that empathy, which of course is a life skill. And then the second thing, this is really because my brain is like constantly on AMAZE because there's so much
Yeah.
good stuff, but it really makes me think about how this is basically that conversation was basically a conversation about consent, right? And
It was.
I think that so many parents, I've just heard through this work and, in other conversations, parents of young kids kind of get a little like, oh, wait, no, you're telling me we have to talk about consent? Like that's scary. Like that, I don't want to talk to kids about sex. And it's not about that at all. It's bodily, is it called autonomy or awareness?
Autonomy.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating to me. I just love hearing these kind of examples in real life, about how that's really coming out to play in very, very simple ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been so awesome. I was wondering, do you have any other, like we've gone through the 4 tips. This has been so great to dig into them a little deeper than
Yeah.
an infographic, as much as I love infographics. Do you have any other kind of closing thoughts or things that you like any pro tips that you feel like people should know beyond these related to communication? I know it's kind of like an ongoing
Yeah.
whole thing.
Well, it is ongoing. And I think we as adults, we can't assume that, like, oh, the communication thing, I got this. But I think if we're always working on ourselves, meaning working on how we communicate with people and how we communicate with our children, again, that says so much more than saying, this is how you should do it, right? So we're always modeling for them what relationships look like, how we relate within our families, with our partners, with other relatives. They're soaking all of that up, and they relate. They're seeing how people of different genders relate. Um, they're seeing people of different ages relate, and then how you communicate with them. And I think it's also important to be able to say to your child when you mess up around communication. So there have been times when I was short with my daughter. I'm frustrated. Being able to go back to her and say, "I am so sorry. I was really short with you just now because I was really frustrated about something that was happening at work and I took that out on you and I should when you do that with your child, they then know, oh, I can apologize to someone if if I do something wrong. My mom was able to apologize to me, or they can say, wow, if I mess up, I can go back to that person and have a conversation. So that they know that communication is always this negotiation. And it's not about being right or wrong or who's good or who's bad. It's just trying to relate to one another. And sometimes we don't do a great job of that. And when you let them know, that's okay, then they're like, oh, okay, I could do that. Yeah. So it's not easy, but it makes all the difference. All the difference.
Well, I think that is the perfect way to close, with a little element of self-forgiveness and external forgiveness, and the power of saying sorry and all those good things. So, Lucinda, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. This was so awesome. And I just wanted to say again, remind people, if you're coming to the broadcast later, please drop any comments. We'll come back and check on them. Lucinda, you are awesome. I love that I finally got to meet you in person a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. And thank you for being on today. It was really great to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care.
Okay.